That's just lying. That's just consumer fraud. You can bring these public interest actions against Airbnb to say, we think this is an illegal clause. We need you to force them to either be clear that they're not actually offering this, or to make them put a process in place where they're stepping up right away to help you when your house is burned down and you've got nowhere to live and your insurance company's dragging the feet.
This gentleman, Enrico Schaefer, is the man, and he can teach you how to get through Airbnb's claims and arbitration process so that way you can get back all of the money that they owe you. And trust me, it's a lot. Enrico has pulled back millions of dollars from Airbnb on behalf of his clients, and now he's helping us do this for free on our own. Check this video out.
I've done technology law since 1992, when the new and emerging technology was something called the internet. So I represent platforms such as Airbnb, and I understand how the terms of service work, all these different technology-based issues. So I got the same email you all got in March 13th, 2020, saying, hey, we're going to refund all your guests because of COVID. And that started me into taking a look at the ECP and some of those issues. I have hundreds of these ECP COVID arbitration cases going against Airbnb over the last 3.5 years. And as a result of that, now I have the pleasure of representing hosts in arbitration cases against Airbnb in all kinds of situations. Unjustified termination from the platform, suspensions, air cover claims, and discrimination claims, these types of issues. So now I do a lot of other types of arbitration beyond the COVID ECP stuff.
Yeah, it's big. And I think I remember, like what you were talking about yesterday too, which was really kind of enlightening, was the fact that we should not be scared to file arbitrations, right? I think that's probably one of the biggest things. People are afraid of asking Airbnb to replace the couch that was destroyed or to repaint the wall that got punched a hole in, because they think that Airbnb would see them as a threat and start removing people who have big expenses from the platform.
Yeah, it's the classic don't hit me again kind of mentality that we all have as hosts, right? Because we're so used to being, maybe abused is too strong for some, but for others it's not. So used to being marginalized by Airbnb as hosts that everyone's afraid of Airbnb. And so the number one question we get on virtually every call that comes through our system is Airbnb going to retaliate against me? Is Airbnb going to throw me off the platform if I create a fuss? And the answer is no. And you and I talked about this yesterday. The reasons are multiple, but one of which is Airbnb cannot take the risk that its class action waiver in the terms of service and its arbitration mandate in the terms of service gets stricken by a court, meaning they're no longer valid because Airbnb is not participating in its consumer-friendly dispute resolution promise in order to avoid class actions, in order to avoid courtroom litigation. So in order for those things to stick, Airbnb cannot do anything that would be perceived as retaliation against a host for bringing a claim.
Yeah, that's nuts. And right now you're trying to get 10,000 arbitrations in for the COVID-19 class action kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And if they screwed this up, you wouldn't have to wait till 10,000 arbitrations. You might be able to punch this in faster.
Yeah, exactly. So they force you into individual arbitration, cannot be collective action. You can't join with anyone else. And that's part of the way they use the arbitration process as a barrier, as a weapon against you as a host, right? So in situations like the COVID ECP situation, where everyone suffered the same damages in the sense that the strict cancellation policy was ignored, right? In those situations, normally you would do a class action. They don't allow you to do a class action. So then it's like, okay, choke on this, right? Here are thousands of arbitration claims for which Airbnb's got to hire its own attorney. Airbnb has to pay all but $200 of the initial filing fee. Airbnb has to pay all of the administrative fees for the American Arbitration Association. So a single arbitration can cost it $20,000 to $40,000 or more, $100,000. So you could do the math on that. Let's just say it is a $30,000 spend per arbitration and you've got 1,000 arbitration, you're starting to talk about tens or hundreds of millions of dollars just in transaction fees that Airbnb has to expend in order to defend itself. So with the host community, we're constantly evangelizing. I mean, you're trying to educate everyone, we're trying to educate everyone. And our issues are a little different, but our goal is the same: is we need hosts to act together. We need hosts to band together, because together hosts are bigger than Airbnb. As individuals, we're nothing. They don't care about us one bit, right? But collectively, they have to care about us. So one of the things that happened as a result of the COVID ECB debacle was that hosts did start to band together more and start to get organized a little bit more. And we continue that effort to try and get hosts to really, as part of their toolkit, learn to arbitrate their claims, their disputes with Airbnb on not getting paid. You know, they offer 50% on what you clearly lost in damages on that rug, right? Of course, they're going to only offer 50% because they're basically saying, sue us, right? And the sue us is file an arbitration dispute. And they know that most hosts won't do that. So they get off, they get 50% discount on their host guarantee, right? And their air cover. Yeah. So you have to, as a host, be able to navigate the arbitration system. It is as important as customer service, as ranging for cleaning and maintenance and all the rest, because you have to be able to fight back against Airbnb when they tie you to the tracks and run you over.
Yeah, that's wild. And for anybody listening, ECP is extenuating circumstance policy, I believe, right? So
correct.
That's what he means, what he's using the fast language. And you said something interesting yesterday too, which is that Airbnb is starting to do less COVID style refunds because they changed their policy to be unforeseeable events, which you use an example of like a hurricane in Florida or a wildfire in California. When things are happening and they're known to happen, Airbnb is no longer covering those reasons for cancellation because the guest is assuming some risk traveling to somewhere where they know there could be hurricanes.
Exactly. So back in 2020, they had two categories of extenuating circumstances that could override your cancellation policy. One were like generalized events like hurricanes and fires. The other was individual circumstances like flight cancellations with no alternative flights, or a doctor's note when you're sick or when your guest is sick. They completely, and I think as a result of our filings, but they completely eliminated the personal circumstance part of the ECP. So it doesn't matter if something happens to you as an individual, if it's a strict cancellation policy or a moderate cancellation policy, and you're only going to get 50% back, then that's the way it is, right? Mm-hmm. However, they also drastically limited the kind of the generalized circumstances that might be, for instance, a wildfire in a particular area of California. If wildfires in Northern California are, not unusual, then that's not an unexpected circumstance that could get a guest out of paying your selected cancellation fee. So they've narrowed it down, and the real reason, I think, is because they don't want to do customer support for anything, right? They don't want to offer customer support across the board. And what they realized with COVID, and the reason why they refunded all your guests, is because they didn't want to staff the requirement to be able to walk each guest through the ECP process to see if they qualified. So they saved hundreds of millions of dollars in processing of claims by just simply using your money as a host and giving it to the guest, right? Yeah. And they realize they don't want to staff that in the future.
Yeah, that's wild. So yeah, I've noticed that they have multiple defenses. One, they'll probably kick out a certain percentage of claims because they just know you won't go to arbitration. And then two, they'll like negotiate and try to settle for half. Curious, we didn't talk about this yesterday. What's the largest arbitration payout you've seen come across your desk that somebody's won?
Over $500,000. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, and we've had some where they then awarded attorneys fees, and there are cases that I've arbitrated on a contingency fee for hosts where I had $160,000 in fees into it in risk. And in limited circumstances where Airbnb's defenses are frivolous, for instance, the arbitrators can award those attorneys fees as part of the damages. So they can get upside down pretty quick on these cases, the big ones. It's the volume of the small ones that really start to become interesting, right? Because if Airbnb owes you $2,000 and it's going to cost them $30,000 to defend it, why would they not just pay the $2,000? So if they do not have a reasonable defense, the act of filing for arbitration or small claims, if you happen to be within your small claims jurisdictional limit, we'll talk about that more on Thursday. But if you file a claim against them, it is just far more economical for them to pay you than it is to fight you on the smaller claims. On the bigger claims, that's not true, right? They're going to fight you on the bigger claims because there's more at risk. The smaller claims, arbitration is to your advantage if you know how to file.
Yeah, that's solid. So with arbitration, would we file like batches of small claims, say, hey, Airbnb's canceled these 10 guests and you have one arbitration with 10 separate demands for relief, or would you file 10 separate arbitration claims?
It's a great question. And I would say this, that to the extent that the claims are logically, related or similar in the type of claim, my recommendation is put them all in one. Some hosts will take the self-help, they'll represent themselves, and they'll break it down into 20 different arbitrations. And you're entitled to do that under the terms of service. And that means Airbnb's got to pay 20 times the amount of administrative fees and arbitrator fees and filing fees. That really pisses Airbnb off. And so in my experience, playing fast and loose with that can sometimes just make them want to fight. And they certainly have more than enough money to fight if they want to. And you're going to end up fighting with the arbitrator a number of motions trying to, consolidate them in one way or another. So I think that efficiency in most situations is going to determine that you want to file as many together as you can, especially if there's solid claims. You want to get that in front of an arbitrator with the least friction possible, let that arbitrator rule in your favor.
Cool, because they can approve and deny like point by point. So you could win 9 out of the 10 in one arbitration filing still. They're not going to wipe the whole thing because one's bad.
That's correct. All you need to do is win one of them and you win, right? Mm-hmm. So, and I find on the air cover claims, the host guarantee claims, Airbnb doesn't have a good defense 99% of the time. They do owe you. If it's a legitimate claim and you haven't contrived anything, and you've got the evidence, you're going to win those most of the time in arbitration. And if it turns out that Airbnb just wasn't justified at all in not paying you, then there's at least a chance that the arbitrator is going to do more rather than less, right?
Solid. So we have to pay $200 of the filing, right?
Unless you qualify as I'll just say income challenged, right? You can't actually avoid that $200 fee if you do not have enough money to pay it. But generally you pay $200, they pay $300. The total filing fee is $500. Then after that, everything's paid by Airbnb. And those costs range anywhere between $6,000 and $12,000 for Airbnb, just paying the American Arbitration Association and the assigned arbitrator.
Cool. So in that case, if we have a $100 cancellation that we want money from, we probably should batch it into one larger arbitration claim. Because paying $200 to win 100 is not effective. But if we have a series of small things that Airbnb's gotten away on, we bundle it up and it can be worth our time.
Yeah. And, Sean, you probably hear this as well, but, we're dealing with this host community. They're educated, they're entrepreneurial. And I hear a lot that on principle, Airbnb is not getting away with this, right? So we'll talk more about that on Thursday. I'm always pushing back on hosts who want to go after Airbnb on principle. And I have clients who do, and I have clients who win, but it's still a long process. It still requires effort. And sometimes those principles can wear you down. The better way to look at it is as a business person. Does the return on investment of my time and $200 filing fee and attorney fees hourly, if you decide to hire an attorney, do those justify bringing this action? So for instance, in the unjustified termination cases where hosts are thrown off because a guest lies and they're just, thrown off without any investigation, without the host ever being able to tell their side of the story. 8 years of 5-star host status, right? And this huge track record against a guest who has got one review and they believe the guest and they throw you off. In those circumstances, it makes sense to pay us $10,000 to $20,000 in attorney's fees to get that all the way through hearing, because you're going to make that back in a year as an Airbnb host. So those are situations where we do get retained. In other situations, we'll help from the sidelines people go through the arbitration process again on an hourly basis, but really just more as needed, right? And then this third category is self-help, which is what I'm always evangelizing, which is you don't need an attorney to go into arbitration. You can do it yourself. The process is designed to be consumer friendly. So it can be intimidating to some people, to others, they're all in, but you can do it. And I'm constantly providing free resources. You and I have talked about this, providing free resources to the community so that you can navigate the self-help aspect of arbitration or small claims court so that you can take Airbnb on. And I certainly have had hosts who not only were not retaliated, but ended up getting extra from Airbnb because they had filed for arbitration, because Airbnb doesn't want to mess with them again, because if they do anything to that host moving forward, that host might say it was for retaliation purposes because of the prior arbitration. And that is the nuclear option for Airbnb. They cannot afford a ruling that they retaliated.
Yeah. Hey, a question from somebody on Facebook actually asked, what do you think about the new cancellation policies for hosts? And I've got some of my own opinions on this too, but I think where this comes into you also is like Airbnb has this ruling, and so does VRBO now, right? Where VRBO will charge you up to 50% of the cancellation. Airbnb is known to cancel without your consent or without due process. And now they're charging people an almost infinite amount of money as long as it's 10%. And I feel like this is one of those prime reasons why people should skill up on arbitration, because there's all these past cancellations that they're charging you $200, $500 at a time, and you didn't get your chance to actually make your case. These are good examples for arbitration. But what do you think about the cancellation policy? If there's anything notable you have to say?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's a policy that is driven again by Airbnb's endless desire to make guests happy, right? And so they don't want you canceling, and so they're penalizing you for that. I do not like the policy, and I'm telling you, if the host had any seat at the table, it's your kitchen table, it's your chair at the kitchen table, and you don't even have a seat at it, right? Because as hosts, we just don't have any power to interact with Airbnb over, is this fair? Is this an appropriate policy, right? So I think it's a bad policy for hosts. I think in arbitration, Airbnb's expert witnesses, their litigation support witnesses, say things like, well, if you didn't like that guest, why didn't you just cancel them? It's always the host's right to cancel any guest. So if you were feeling uncomfortable with that guest, why were you calling customer support to try and get our help, right? Why didn't you just cancel them? There's no harm to you for doing so. And then we point out the policy, which is kind of so ambiguous in the terms, right? Or whatever they decide to do in their discretion. And then that same witness will lie and say, oh, but we don't really do that, which of course we know is untrue. They do penalize you, right? So, my big picture, take a big step back, Sean, is if in 2 years or 4 years in this sharing economy, this home sharing economy, if Airbnb hosts had their own organization that was similar to a union for hosts, where we could act collectively, we would be helping draft these policies with Airbnb. They would not have carte blanche authority over us. That's been my mission since day one. That continues to be my mission. Unfortunately, hosts tend to do their own thing until something bad happens to them, right? We need to get ahead of that as hosts. We need to get organized. We need to, be able to influence these policies before they're put into effect. And right now, Airbnb just does whatever they want.
So by successfully entering into a class action one day, if it goes that way, part of your seeking of relief would be to force some form of oversight that where the court says Airbnb has to create this unionized group of hosts and have collaborative language.
Yeah, so it would be more on an issue by issue basis because it would have to be the host doing it themselves. But let me give you an example of one of the public interest lawsuits that we're considering for Airbnb. So right now, the host air cover, host guarantee property damage policies that Airbnb has, they say, hey, look, we got you covered. It's safe. You open up your home to these strangers because we got your back, right? And we're going to pay for these damages if they occur. Well, that's great if it's a paper towel holder, but if the guest burns your entire home down, guess what? Airbnb's fraudulently marketing this program as covering you, and they do not cover you. They will make your primary insurance, your homeowner's insurance, close their file before they'll even engage with you. Well, that's not what they say on their website. That's not what they tell you about air cover and the damage protection clause. So that's just lying. That's just consumer fraud. So you can bring these public interest actions against Airbnb to say, we think this is an illegal clause. We need you to force them to either be clear that they're not actually offering this, or to make them put a process in place where they're stepping up right away to help you when your house is burned down and you've got nowhere to live and your insurance company's dragging the feet, right? So those types of a la carte issues are in the works, but the bigger issue is getting organized and really being able to fight back. First step is getting hosts to arbitrate. I know the attorneys. I work with them hundreds of cases with Airbnb attorneys. They're already maxed out on their capacity to defend the cases that our law firm is bringing. So if another 1,000 get filed of the millions of hosts, they have to settle with you. They can't staff the defense of these lawsuits. So arbitration is a good first step to start to fight back.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's really cool. And so you mentioned something about the cancellation policy here, and I think hosts may not understand. What you said is that hosts have a right to cancel guests, right? Could you explain to people that relationship between Airbnb, the service provider, and the guest, where maybe people are misunderstanding why they have more authority than they think they do?
Yeah, I mean, the way if I'm understanding your question, the way I always describe the difference between VRBO and Airbnb is VRBO pretty much lets you do what you're going to do with your guest and the guest with the host. It's your agreement. They don't put their fingers in every single issue along the way. Airbnb is the opposite. They've got your money. They're holding your money through the payment processing entity, Airbnb Payments Inc. So they've got your money that they're using through this entire period of time that you're waiting for that guest to check in. And then they're using that as leverage to be able to move that money around between you and your guest, right? So Airbnb says it's just a platform in order to reduce its legal liability. But the reality, and it says that the rental contract's purely between you and your guest, and they have no involvement in it. It's right in the terms of service. Again, it's fraud. It's not true. Airbnb is not only sitting at the table, they act as though they own the table, right, in your kitchen. So they're kind of puppeteer of all of the things that are happening between you and your guest, and they're moving the pieces along the board in order to benefit their business. They're using your money, your sweat equity in order to grow their business. It's like you're an investor with no stock, right? And so as a guest, the guest is using the platform as a member with Airbnb. You're a host, you're using the platform as a member with Airbnb, and you should have the right to cancel that reservation without Airbnb stepping in. You should have the right to be able to have your cancellation policy applied as agreed to in your rental contract without Airbnb stepping in. Airbnb's model is this kind of hyper involved, use your money, your time, your property to grow its business approach. And we all know that means basically siding with the guest, and it's moving both the money and the pieces around in favor of the guest and against you as the host. And that's what's been happening for many years, and it continues to happen.
So is there something that a host would say to a Airbnb representative when they want to invoke their authority for their contract, or is this something that has to get like taken care of on the back end?
Has to get taken care of on the back end. So you've got customer support who have no authority to do much of anything, and they're very challenging to work with oftentimes because it's all scripted stuff, right? There is a layer of management above that. That's the first step. Get a manager involved, right? And if it's a trust and safety issue, then there's a whole different department that's going to get involved in what they call trust and safety issues, which are someone's at risk, property's been damaged, some of these other things. So you've got to try and scale up as much as you can within that customer support system. Chances are you're not going to get very far. Your next step is you have to then tell them you're filing for arbitration. You got to wait 30 days, and then you can go ahead and file with AAA arbitration. Some of my clients don't even wait because Airbnb in all these years has never even responded to one of our notice of arbitrations, let alone tried to engage in settlement discussions. And in many instances, those letters to the address that they require you to send it to come back as return to sender. So that tells you what a joke it is, right? That they're going to try and work things out with you. They're going to challenge you to fight them. And if you don't, they win.
So you send those letters certified, I'm assuming, so you can say that you tried, they never respond, you go straight into arbitration. And at that point, they'll go, like when the arbitration is filed, they'll potentially settle to not have to go all the way through.
Yes. And I think that, that in the process is that once you file it and you serve it, it's all in the terms of service, exactly what you have to do. It's really easy. Then AAA does its administrative thing, and they give Airbnb so many days to respond. The key point in that process is when an attorney gets assigned to that case by Airbnb, and they use outside attorneys, that attorney gets the file. And that's the point where you can have a discussion with someone. I mean, it's like you go from customer support is your really ridiculously poor access to Airbnb. The next time you can get access is after you file for arbitration. An attorney is assigned, they have the file, and you can discuss the matter with them and try and settle it.
Cool. Thank you for that. And by the way, guys, anybody listening, Enrico made a resource for free for you guys that walks through the entire arbitration process. It's a Google Docs file. I've actually linked it a couple places. It's in the chat for this live stream on Facebook. And if you're in the free group, the hosts of Airbnb Automated, there's a post about this live stream that has the link to that dispute resolution resource that Enrico made. To talk about tomorrow too, all this is because of tomorrow we're going to be spending a couple hours with you guys live. You'll be able to ask questions. You'll be able to maybe even tell a little bit of a story of what you're going through and ask for maybe some advisement. We're going to cover the resolution process first, how to properly make sure we document correctly, go into the resolution process so we can win from Airbnb within their system. But ultimately, if Airbnb doesn't approve our claims, we'd have to push an arbitration. So we're going to bridge both of those together, resolution through to arbitration, and then do some Q&A. It's going to be really fun. It'll probably go for 2-ish, maybe even 3 hours. Enrico will give us as much of his time as I think he can. So, hopefully we can get the Q&A jammed in there with enough time to get some of that. And that way you guys can start doing resolutions and then arbitration on your own without having to retain someone like Enrico, unless it's a big deal. Like he talked about, like some big ones, like account removal. And tomorrow we will have a arbitration template document that you guys will be able to use, and you'll take away from the webinar, this arbitration template, which would not be cheap if you guys had to hire an attorney to make it from scratch. And we're going to try to give you different template language so you can use it for multiple reasons. Like if Airbnb cancels without your permission or doesn't pay a air cover claim, we're going to try to make this thing easy enough to use that you guys can go into multiple arbitration scenarios with language that you don't necessarily have to understand all the way, to
Exactly.
So
exactly. And look, at American Arbitration Association's got a form you can fill out at the very low end that has a text box, and you could just kind of very generally say what you're doing. And that works, but you're going to find in these arbitration proceedings, getting the arbitrator educated as quickly as possible as to exactly what the issue is and exactly what Airbnb did wrong is critical. you don't want them going through the process, waiting for the evidentiary hearing, wondering what the issue is, right? They can help you if they have enough information. So we always recommend try and do a demand for arbitration that's more detailed, and attach anything that you need to attach. If it's receipts from a host guarantee, air cover, property damage claim, in the chat history, make it easy for the arbitrator, because if they come into that first scheduling conference and they've read it, which they always will, and they know what the issue is, they can start leveraging up against Airbnb right away and give you the discovery you're going to need to be able to get the documents in order to prove your case, some of which only Airbnb has access to.
Yeah, that's really good. And another thing I like too, which we'll talk about more in depth tomorrow, the arbitrations that you file are compelling. I've noticed you got point by point why this person's a good host, why this person, you know, is in bounds with Airbnb's terms of service, why the person filing arbitration should be regarded like this person's been on the platform for 6 years, all these positive reviews. Like you make all these bullet points to kind of parade the positives of the client or the person filing arbitration, and then probably bullet points of all the transgressions Airbnb has made. And it reminds me a lot of like court cases I've been in Philadelphia, where I disputed with some landlords who tried to commit, like there's one, I can't talk too much about it, but it was our perspective that they were trying to commit mortgage fraud, right? And so when we made these motions, we've had these multi-page motions that would say, Sean is awesome in all these ways, other guy is bad guy in all these ways, and file these motions that were very colorful. And I noticed in the template that I reviewed that you shared with me that like when somebody's account was removed, you had a lot of that complimentary language for the host, which I thought was really cool, really compelling.
It's important because these cases are credibility. It's all about credibility. You as a host versus Airbnb, you as a host versus the guest who lied, right? And you're the only one who's going to be sitting there at the evidentiary hearing who was part of it, because Airbnb will never provide as a witness the people who kicked you off the platform, the people who decided not to pay you. They'll put a litigation support person in place who knows nothing about the issue, talk to no one, as a effort to try and make sure that none of the details come out. The guest isn't going to be there. So if you have high credibility, if you're a 5-star host, you need to market that. And I've had cases where hosts maybe made some mistakes and did some questionable things, but still got all the relief they were requesting because of their track record as a 6-year host with great reviews, because of the fact that there's this huge data set of how good you are as a host that Airbnb never even considered before they believed this one complaint of a camera without a picture, right? So, and there's some crazy stuff, Sean. I've had clients who literally got thrown off the platform because their 27-year-old son visited at Christmas and shared an IP address with the same internet connection with you over the holidays at your home. And that person, your son, was in fact kicked off the platform because of a background check, which revealed a fight at age 17. So now more than 10 years later. And there's all kinds of ways things bad that are really bad can happen to you as a host that you could never see coming, right? Could never see coming. If you file a single arbitration against Airbnb, you will forever be able to say the reason they really did this is because you filed for arbitration against them. That is huge leverage, right?
So like every host should get one in.
Everyone should get one in, and at least one, and be ready to do it again, and make it part of your toolbox, because it's the only leverage you have against Airbnb. It's the only way you're going to ever have any semblance of fairness in your relationship with them.
So another question for you, this might be one of the last ones, so we can let you go because you've been generous with your time. How far back can someone reach to something that they were not given and say they want to file an arbitration claim?
It's a good question. So most of these are breach of contract actions, and your choice of law is California, right? So let me just pull it up real quick here. In California, you've got a statute of limitations that is shorter than most states. In some states, it's like 6 years. In California, it is 4 years. Let me make sure they haven't changed it. And that means you've got 4 years to bring your contract action, but you saw in my filings, I also claim negligent performance of a contract, and some other things that are violations of California's consumer protection law for fraud and misrepresentation, these types of leverage items, which can really help you. Statute of limitations on those could be also 3 years and sometimes less. But usually I tell people you want to file within 3 years of anything bad happening. And if you need to actually research something between 3 and 4 years, then just hire an attorney to take a look at the statute. But you've got plenty of time is the main point to bring these types of claims.
And you have to do it out of California. If somebody's got a property in Nevada and something went down in Nevada, can they try to claim out of Nevada, or do they still have to do Cali?
So the terms of service says you got to arbitrate with AAA, or you could bring a small claims court action where you are. If you bring a small claims court action where you are, then the terms of service still say California law applies. California law is great. Really, there's no problem with that, but chances are your local judge is going to apply whatever state law you're in, because it's all about the same. So you are going to file for arbitration online. Locations are relevant. You're going to do everything by Zoom, and the arbitrator is going to apply California law to your action.
Got it. Cool. Right. I think that's really good for everybody to know. I think that's an important thing. So meaning anybody within the last 3 years that has a consumer protection claim is open, last 4 years for breach of contract. So for example, the ECP thing, the extenuating circumstances with COVID, anybody who wanted to file a COVID refund claim has 6 months, 4 months.
Yeah, 6 months left. Exactly.
Yeah, because it's from the date of breach, which would be March-ish.
Yes. Now it's a rule. It's from the date you should have been paid for every single guest, right? So we know that March was kind of bad. April was terrible. May was
April
really bad.
6th was
then
the
things
worst.
started to get a little bit better as time went on. But
Yeah.
generally, I always think of March 13th, 2020 as kind of the day, and you want to file before March of 2020.
Sweet. Okay. So, and host, I think in this case, because of the nature of what you're trying to accomplish, if it's COVID related, they should probably come to you so you can bundle them into the 10,000.
Exactly. Now we are not taking on any more cases at this point, but you can get in the database and decide if we decide to file one more batch of several hundred before the statute runs. So you would have the option of doing it yourself, which some people do, but these are challenging cases, or just getting in our database, and we're starting to see our next batch of several hundred cases move forward, and then we'll reassess whether or not we're willing to do another filing. But you could always contact us at traverslegal.com and get in our data set so that if we do file another batch of cases, you're part of that. What we typically need is you can confirm that you had a strict cancellation policy in place, and have a list of confirmation numbers that were refunded against your cancellation policy under the ECP for COVID, right? And that'll get you through the door.
Okay, solid, really cool. But if people don't have those reservation codes, would they still be able to find them somehow, like going through like a discovery process?
Yeah, so basically if you did that, we provide you a search sequence that you can run on your inbox that will pull out of all the hundreds of thousands of Airbnb emails you get, right? That'll pull out those ones that are COVID ECP related. Assuming you still have your emails, you can pull them out that way. You don't have to have 100% of the confirmation numbers, but Airbnb will sometimes contest that you have a claim. And it's very challenging for us to get from that point to discovery if we don't know for sure you've got a claim. So we like to have at least some of those confirmation numbers to provide to Airbnb and say, oh yeah. And then more often than not, they're like, oops, sorry, yeah, you're right.
That's killer. That's really cool. All right, awesome. Well, I think this is probably a good time to wrap it up, so that way we can get back to preparing for tomorrow. I really appreciate your time. This was really awesome. Is it okay if I put this on YouTube? I might chop it up and like put this on YouTube for people to reference for some legal advice.
absolutely, no problem.
Cool.
Share like, pay it forward.
Awesome. I really appreciate you. So everybody, we'll see you tomorrow. Any of you who want to attend, that'll give you a chance to actually talk directly and do some Q&A. And like I said, we're going to cover resolutions through arbitration, get you a resource so you can use it. I'm Sean. For those of you who don't know, this is Enrico. He's going to be the man of the hour tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you all that. Thank you so much, Enrico.
All right, no problem.